Have you checked the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I'm known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King, but actually an exciting crossover double down of an episode, because this is the first installment in a while of Run to the Hill! Yes, so besides doing this weekly program on the horror show for over 6 years now, by being Hail to Stephen King, and obviously Bimini's and welcome to the horror show, I have also had the awesome opportunity in over 300 episodes of covering Joe, and not just Joe, son of the king, Joseph Hillstrom King, goes by Joe Hill, obviously, the purveyor of so much awesomeness, whether Heart-Shaped Box, Nosferatu, The Fireman, Lock and Key. King's Kid is not just good, he is damn good. And so that's why it's kind of fun to do a little bit of a revisit today, because exactly 10 years ago, this previous, a couple days ago, August 21st, was the release of the collected edition of Road Rage. And so this is a story, at least, that I have covered a little bit here on the horror show, because if you go all the way back to the very second episode of Hail to Stephen King that I ever filmed back, I believe it was like February 12th, 2017. So how far are we going back? Way back. But so King had 3 specific uncollected short stories at that time, at least, that were collaborations with other people. And so there was A Face in the Crowd, the baseball-centric story about a man's life kind of flashing before his eyes, co-written with Stuart Onan, who he did Faithful with. For the longest time, up until like this year when it was announced, they have only had that one available in an ebook form, and I believe it's also available as an Audible. But finally getting the physical release from none other than my peeps at Cemetery Dance. I'm thinking Century Media, a metal label that I worked for when I was a street teamer many years ago as an intern. But yes, so Cemetery Dance are putting out the first physical version of A Face in the Crowd. But then the other 2 collaborations that I covered in that second episode ever of Hail was his 2 collaborations with his elder son, Joe Hill. And so there was the Amazing in the Tall Grass that I still think is one of the most disturbing things that either of them have written, if I'm going to be honest about it, especially with what happens at the end with the consumption of something. It was adapted into a original film for Netflix, which I appreciate. I think it was the same guy who did Splice and Cube, if I remember correctly. The name of the director is eluding me. But then the third and the final tale that I discussed in that was an exclusive to this 2009 anthology, and entitled He is Legend, but it was an anthology, as they say right here, celebrating Richard Matheson. And so you had Joe R. Lansdale was a part of this. You wrote Bubba Hotep, obviously King and his son collaborating on the tale, and even Richard's kid, Richard Christian Matheson, I want to say. Mick Garris is on this. I mean, there's a lot of very noteworthy names, and so I discussed it's around 40 pages, the source material that was in turn adapted for the visual inclined in this particular release from IDW. Cool thing about this specifically is that, so you have the 2-issue, obvious, comic version of Throttle, which is it's a tale inspired by Duel. Now, Duel is one of Richard Matheson's more well-known stories. It was originally published in early 1971, and then, since he was already pretty well established at that point, very renowned and stuff, later that year, it was directed as a made-for-TV ABC Movie of the Week by none other than Steven Spielberg. That's right, man. So this was before all of the, just accolades from, Jaws and Close Encounters and E.T. and stuff. So I believe that was his feature debut, but albeit, it was a made-for-TV movie, so not quite as prestigious. But, so, Duel is a story essentially about it's about road rage, hence the title here. And so as kind of a springboard point, or as King describes it in one of 2 different introductions that are in this book, he basically described it as almost like a side story based off of Duel. So, but I say springboard because of the fact that they take kind of that road rage concept with the Throttle tale, and King and Joe, while paying homage, they still really impressively make it all their own. And so in this release, you have both Duel, which is adapted into 2 issues, so the original short story by Matheson, and then you also have King and Joe's reimagining in Throttle. So it is 4 issues broken up into 2 halves, and then also have great new introductions. So King does the first one, and in King's he essentially talks about just how much from a creative standpoint and from like an inspiration standpoint Richard Matheson meant to him, where I believe he said that the first thing that he ever read from him, he was in like 6th grade or something, and it was like the Incredible Shrinking Man, or the Shrinking Man, yeah, and he described how the cover had this like tiny little like 8-inch man with like a pin trying to fight a spider, but then he also goes on to talk about how awesome he thought I Am Legend was, which a lot of people know was adapted 3 different times if I'm not mistaken. So the first one in the 50s or 60s, I'm trying to remember, maybe it was the 50s. Anyway, I remember it was black and white, it had Vincent Price, it was effective. Then you get to my personal favorite version of it, which had Moses Charlton Heston, and yeah, it's called The Omega Man. If you've never seen that 70s, it's kind of schlocky, but it's very of the times, it's very entertaining. And then the most recent adaptation was the one with Will Smith, and not bad, you know, actually entitled I Am Legend, so as opposed to, you know, taking the title of the story and trying to alter it or whatever. But so yeah, King in his introduction, he just talks about how much he really enjoyed Matheson and how much of an inspiration, and Duel definitely being something that, you know, just kind of got the gears turning in his head as he was starting out with publishing of short fiction and, you know, all of that when he was in his late teens and early 20s in college. So then you get Joe's description, which is very interesting in his introduction, because he essentially says that my dad and I started writing this story when I was 6 years old. And I'm like, 6 years old? Damn. And he's like, yeah, this was like 34 years later. I think he just turned 40 upon the publication of this. But so he says that in 1978, when his dad was obviously just really approaching like that, hitting that zenith of fame. So, you know, he sold the Carey paperback rights. He had money to spare. And so he was like the only person that his family was the only one that they were acquainted with that had a video disc player. And so the video disc players were like something, if I remember, they like preceded the laser discs. So as Joe described them, he's like, they were as big as a vinyl, they were huge and silver, so glossy you could see your reflection in them, but they were also like as thick as like a skillet or something, or you know something you'd be cooking your eggs or frying pork chop in or whatever. So he's like, yeah, each side only had 20 minutes, and so we would have to like go and flip it just like you would with vinyl records and stuff. But there were 3 films that his dad, that Cy King, bought along with this video disc player, and they were all 3 Spielbergs, and I've mentioned all of them already. So they were Duel, they were Jaws, and they were Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And he's mentioning how when he was a kid that summer, 6 years old, 8 years old, whatever Joe had said it was, watching these 3 movies on repeat with his dad over and over that year. And he was like, I was like Richard Dreyfuss. Anytime we'd have mashed potatoes, I was like making the Devil's Mountain or Devil's Canyon or whatever. So, but they watched ad nauseum, and in constant repeat, they watched Duel. And so he's like, every time my dad and I would go out on the road, we would immediately start envisioning Duel. And, you know, if we encountered this crazy psychotic driver, like what it would entail, and, you know, where he would run us off the road and what we would smash into. And so he was approached in 2009 to actually write for this particular anthology, He Is Legend, you know, the actual short story Throttle. And he's like, you know, I got an idea if it's going to pay homage to Matheson. And he said that he emailed El Rey, his dad, and they got to just remembering some of those ideas and some of those aspects. And so I would imagine a lot of people are familiar with Duel and the whole road rage of it all. And I mean, very much like that Offspring song, Bad Habit, that I love so much. Drivers are rude, such attitudes, but when I show my peace, complaints say something's odd, feel like I'm God. And then I can't say the rest because I don't want to get demonetized, but yeah, all the profanity that Dexter just, you know, spits out there in that particular Offspring song. But Duel is still, at the end of the day, a fairly simple story in a lot of ways, because you've got this guy, this guy by the name of Man. He spells it with 2 N's. I don't even know if we ever get his first name mentioned at all, just Man. And so he's a traveling salesman. He's on his way to San Francisco, and this is where, as somebody who's done a lot of driving work over the years myself, like I worked for the Phoenix New Times in the circulation department delivering their magazines and papers and stuff, and then even when I was a lot younger, I was like catering food, you know, when I was working in the Italian business and stuff, and I was still service industry. And so, yeah, I have most definitely logged a lot of miles in a vehicle, and even more so like here in the heat of the deadly desert of Arizona, where the road rage factor escalates because of the temperature, obviously. Even when you're rocking your air conditioning, man, it's still not particularly pleasant. You have to really drain that gas if you're going to keep your vehicle even moderately cool. But so I have seen my fair share of people get, a lot of the time, unnecessarily pissed off on the road because there's a distinctive difference between passing somebody and, you know, somebody cutting you off. Cutting you off is, it's far less safe. It's much more degaff, asshole, whatever. Whereas passing somebody is just a natural nature of the road, most notably on a highway like you have in Matheson's Duel, which is presented second in this. So you get Throttle, which is King and Hill's re-envisioning, and then you get the original story. It's a different artist for the two, so I believe Nelson Daniel is the one who does the first half, and then the second half, which is adapting the original story, Rafa Geddes, it looks like. But the story itself adapted by Chris Real. So, you know, taking Joe and Steve's story and kind of repurposing it, almost like where you're like, okay, I'm adapting a short story into a screenplay kind of thing. Obviously a little bit different with comic panels and whatnot. And then he did the same thing with Matheson's original. So from a visual standpoint, I will say that the King and Joe story, it feels very like there is a sheen, like kind of glossiness to the art where it does look very much like it was done digitally, like on a computer, like lots of post and stuff in that, whereas in the artist that does Duel, like there is much more of like a grimy 70s rusticness to it of sorts that I really dig. So, I mean, and it exemplifies in a lot of ways the character of Man and how he's stressed, he's running late because he already had left, you know, just past when he should have to get to San Francisco in time for said meetings and whatnot. And so he's a little stressed. He probably needs a good shower and sleep at a motel, but nope, he's got to forge forward. And so he passes this trucker, and the trucker in turn passes him right back. And then it just, the tension builds and escalates. I mean, one of the only times you get a little bit of breathing room is where after he's pretty much ran off the road by this trucker, he stops at this like Chuck's Diner or something to get a ham on rye and have a Kurz, but he thinks the trucker is somewhere in the establishment because, you know, he thought the guy was going to keep chugging along as he, you know, just swerved and went into this this road stop kind of area, but then turns out he does see the vehicle. So I'm not trying to, if you've never seen the Spielberg made-for-TV film, or if you have never read the Matheson original short story, I highly recommend it. It builds tension and it just escalates throughout and gets like kind of crazier and crazier with how this guy, like he is at the mercy of this huge trucker, despite the fact that he's in a small little car. You know, obviously, like, you know, at an incline, there's one point where he's like, okay, maybe I can finally speed away and get away from this dude. Not going to say how it all pans out and what happens in the very end, aside from the fact that King and Joe's reimagining with Throttle is significantly more of like a gory and, you know, just violent over-the-topness to it. And that's because their particular story, Throttle, and at its core, more so than anything, is that it is a story about a father and son and kind of their essence of dysfunction. So the son, who goes by the moniker of Race, which the fact that this story is about a biker gang called the Tribe. And so Race is the son of like the lead boss, the head honcho guy whose name is Vince, if I remember correctly, just to double check my notes. But so they are hot on the heels of some really negative shizzle going down because they decided to invest $60,000 in a meth lab with this guy that the son had known back when he was in like Fallujah and over in the Middle East, because it's, obviously written of that time. So the son is a veteran who had this guy named Clark that he met, and they cook up this idea to start cooking meth. They're going to get glassy gackety with it. And some shizzle goes down, and money is lost, and there is a disagreement, and Clark's girlfriend comes out with a gun after they're having this very tense meeting, and she's like, shots are fired, and then she in turn gets hacked up with a machete, like 30, 40 times, because she's underage. She's jailbait 17, but, she's, unfortunately, I knew people who found themselves in drugs at a very young age, unfortunately, and, yeah, sad stuff, especially with what happens to her. And so they're having a disagreement, our father and our son, Vince and Race, about where they should go. So they're right around the Nevada-Arizona border. So they're in that like far northern Arizona, right around. There's this vehicle that terrorizes them. It says Laughlin on the side of this 18-wheeler. But so they're having a disagreement, and then, despite not seeing eye to eye, one wants to continue on to Vegas, that's the father, and then the other one, the son, wants to go down to Rolo and trying to get some additional information about whether all of this money is in fact lost in the venture. And so, yeah, there is not a seeing eye to eye between dad and son, and that's where it's cool that Joe and Steve as son and father wrote this together. And as Joe even mentions in the introduction here, he's like, I'm actually nothing like this dynamic that Race has with his dad, because me and my dad really get along and we have a lot of fun together. But just to explore that dynamic, I think that, how could you raise a parent without at least having some aspect of contention, some sort of disagreement? Steve and Joe have a lot in common. They're both in the same profession. They both have the same, social and political leanings and beliefs in that regard and stuff like that. So they're kind of like two peas in a pod. Joe, even looks so much like his dad when he was around that same age. It trips me out a lot of the time. But yeah, you have to have had some experience with that at some particular point, I would think. So it's well written, and I also appreciate it's not without its simplicity, very similar to Duel, where it's drawing its inspiration and everything. But the fact that King and Joe did add their own flavor with the subplot of the drug aspect, with the fact that there's bike riders and this tribe of like around 10 peeps, and these guys are, now granted, the only ones that are really flushed out are father and son, but the fact that we do have a larger cast of characters, there's even another biker named Lemmy who's like the father's best friend, or one of his best riding buddies, that they also have disagreements too. So we've got these hard-tempered, like kind of contentious sort of cats. I guess that's kind of par for the course probably. But yeah, the fact that there's more of an ability to have a body count, because right when this trucker starts going after the tribe of bikers, like, you immediately get a couple guys just like ran off the road and smushed like right away. And I think a character relates at one particular point. He's like, yeah, some of my best friends are just grease on the highway now. It's really, it's graphically described. Now granted, the original short story, especially with the death of what transpires with the meth head girl, and also just the description of the gruesomeness and the gore of when these guys are being run off the road. I remembered this when I read it, when I first obtained it all those years ago. I kind of had remembered, because I hadn't revisited it in many years, I kind of remembered it being bloodier than it actually is. Like when the druggy girlfriend gets offed, the panel just cuts right to the next thing, as opposed to really showing it in some gruesome fashion. Now granted, you do get a little bit when our first couple guys are getting run off the road, but even then, you kind of see some of it there. It's not as crazed as I remembered. I guess that's kind of a cool panel right there too. But nonetheless, man, I think the slickness, almost like Metalocalypse sort of look of a lot of these characters, and a lot of which being long-haired and whatever, it does take the gruesome factor of the storytelling out a little bit. And so, I don't know, I feel like the carnage here on the front cover is crazier than most of what we get here inside the book. But just the aspect of disagreement without me revealing, because you do get a revelation as to why this person was going after them in the first place, whereas in Duel it is left just a lot more vague and unexplained, whereas you do get a deep sort of reason for why this person driving this vehicle would be going after the bikers. So that's a good twist. And yeah, just some of the disagreements, the fact that they're both vets, the fact that, you know, the father, the boss, Vince, was in the Vietnam War, and then son being in the Iraqi conflicts and stuff. So they have relatability. They like to bike. They, you know, they're both former military. So there are those aspects. But yeah, the contentiousness of their relationship, it's pretty well developed, even though most of the other characters in this are fairly paper thin. But yeah, and it's also cool to see, you know, King and Joe celebrating just their mutual love of just being out on the road. Now, like, look at these two photos here. I'm probably going to use one for the for the thumbnail, but I dig how much maniacal fun it appears that they're having in this cover to the right, where, you know, they're actually apparently manning the 18-wheeler, but then also the other one with them out on the road riding themselves. You know, they're both avid biker dudes. And I mean, you look at King and some of his attire, most notably in the 90s, but also in the 70s and the 80s too, where, you know, he's wearing like the denim vest with the patches and everything. It was very much like Sons of Anarchy, man, you know? And so he was very much, and always has been, about his Harleys. I still remember reading when he did the Desperation book tour, he was just like the author in that story, where he got on his Harley and he was just riding across the country, man. So he has the affinity, and the apple, once again, didn't fall too far here either with Joe, although King kind of pokes fun at him for driving rice burners, which I know may be not the most PC sort of thing to say, but it is, the phrase is used here in the adaptation of Throttle. So it's a pretty cool collection, y'all, especially if you don't have it in yours already. I think you can obtain it for like around 15 bucks on Amazon. You might even be able to find it cheaper on eBay or the Amazon Marketplace or Abe's Books or something like that. But especially if you're a completist when it comes to collecting King, this is a great one to have. And as that added bonus, the fact that you get the visual representation of the original short story that Throttle was based on. So yeah, it does kind of cover all of those proverbial bases in a pretty cool fashion. So yeah, 10 years old now. I can't believe it's been that long, but hey, to quote Brandon Flowers, the weeks fly by and the years roll on. Most definitely do they, but yes, I'm glad that I finally got the chance to discuss the graphic representation of this, because Cecil and I were talking about it, I think, around the same time we were doing the first couple Marvel Dark Tower comics, and so this was a good 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. So I'm glad that I finally had the opportunity for its respective anniversary, and so yeah, track this down, obtain it. It's a fun little jaunt down the, you know, blood-stained roads of the American highways in the Southwest, and then also the original short story. I recommend it a lot, and especially just this collection in general, because of not just the respect that was being paid to Richard Matheson. I believe he was in the twilight of his life when this came out in 2009. I think he only made it a few more years past this, but especially with a great selection of authors. There's some really rad status tales in here that I think you will appreciate, and they all kind of derive some sense of inspiration from a previous work of Sir Matheson, Sai Matheson, as I will say. So once again, everybody, a grande gracias, and that's going to be the end of the proceedings for today. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find Walt on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Here, obviously, on the YouTubies, we're doing the like, the share, the subscribe thing, spreading the word about Hail to Stephen King as we forge forward well past over 300 episodes at this particular point. And so it is normally on a Tower Tuesday, but this week we had the surprise drop of the Terrifier 2 trailer, and so Cecil really wanted to get that out because David and Damien, the two main creative forces, director and star behind the original film, they've been really cool with us over the years, whether Mad Monster or a few other conventions that we have seen them at. So yeah, man, that's where I was much obliged to, you know, push the typical King show from Tuesday to Wednesday. So yeah, thanks again for everybody checking it out. There is the occasional little detour that I do, so yeah, all of the Run to the Hill stuff, but also Barker at the Moon was really fun doing all the Books of Blood. I think the comic book adaptation is going to be my next pursuit with him. It's either that or the Damnation game, I still haven't decided. And then lastly, the newest thing that I have been doing, and there's 3 entries of it so far now, is Stephen King recommended horror, spotlighting contemporary stuff that they like took a King quote and just, you know, placed it right there on the front to help gain some momentum and interest and stuff. And so there's been 3 entries in that new ongoing series, I guess you could say. So the first one was Scott Smith's The Ruins, which is excellent. Great body horror, little eco-terror sort of bits in there. And then I did a double down with Nick Carter. Oh man, yeah, Nick Cutter, who is a Canadian horror author. He did The Troop that I thought was great, and then he followed it up with The Deep, which I thought was awesome. And so, yeah, I'll probably have to return to him at some particular point for Just Like Heaven. Didn't love The Acolyte as much, but yeah, and I just got finished reading American Gods. I'd never read Neil Gaiman's American Gods before. I'd seen the TV show, but the book is amazing, and I really want to try to find some time to review that here in my Tuesday slot celebrating spectacular literature. So, once again, everyone, I have been Fuego, and y'all have been Rad Status. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, San Amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you, hoping we have been well met and we share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until that instance occurs, remember to stay scared, and in this case, read Stephen King and Joe Hill. Yeah, Road Rage, man. And Richard Matheson, too. Duh.